next part of the presentation, you might remember I said I'd talk a little bit about quality. Does anybody know how many times somebody today has said quality? Was anybody counting? No. We've said quality this, quality that, quality high, quality low. What do we mean by quality? What I mean by quality might be completely different to what you mean by quality. I dare say we could have a good argument. Okay, so our government wanted to know what makes a difference to quality? What do we mean by this? Well, we looked at quality from a number of different ways. And I just want to share some of those with you this afternoon. I am going to talk about EPPEs, but I'm not just going to talk about EPPEs. Okay, we had both the power of our statistics, so we had a heavy quantitative study, but we also had some qualitative studies that helped us understand quality. We found that there was a direct relationship between the qualifications of the staff and the quality of the setting, and the quality of the setting and the outcomes for children. Remember, we were a hard-nosed study about outcomes. If you do this, what difference does it make to children's learning? So, we've looked at a number of different ways of looking at quality. Yes, we use the EPPEs, and you've heard a lot about the EPPEs today. The Early Childhood Environmental Rating Scale, the American instrument, used all over the world. The Swedish score very high on furniture. But it's used all over the world. And you've looked already at some of the subscales: space and furnishings, personal care routines, language reasoning, activities, interaction, program structure, parents and staff. And the way the EPPEs works is that it's a book which has got lots of statements in it. You basically look at the statements. So if I was to come into your setting tomorrow and do an EPPEs on you, I would look at the statements in this book and see whether you did them or you didn't do them. And then there'd be some sort of score. So we used the EPPEs. But we were very conscious that it's an American instrument, it's very care-based, it does look at the environment, and it does look at processes. But at the time we were doing our research, we had an emerging early years curriculum. And so we decided to use something as well as the EPPEs. We developed our own, what we call the Early Childhood Environmental Rating Scale Extension, or the EPPES-E. And the EPPES-E looks at literacy. And by literacy, I don't mean young children sitting in front of blackboards learning how to read. What the EPPES looks at is whether you read to children, whether you surround children with print in the environment, whether you have engaged children in listening to songs and nursery rhymes that help their phonological awareness. So it's about developmentally appropriate scales to look at early literacy awareness. We had mathematics. Again, not children sitting down doing sums. This is about children counting shells as they play in the sand pit. Looking, observing, finding out. And we had diversity. And by diversity, I mean looking at gender awareness, the extent to which those working with young children actually challenged gender stereotypes. We looked at race awareness. We looked at planning for children's individual needs, seeing children as individuals. So that's what we mean diversity. So when I talk about quality, I'm very clear. I mean quality as measured by these particular research instruments. But we also looked at the importance of the adult-child interaction. And Sharon Lynn talked about that this morning, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But we did look in detail at the adult-child interaction. Just to give you an example of an Eckers, how many of you have actually done an Eckers? Anyone? Okay, well, for those of you who don't know, let me give you one example of an Eckers. The scale is 1, 3, 5, 7. And I'm just going to give you one example, staff-child interaction. So this is inadequate. Staff are not responsive. They don't really particularly look at children. They don't particularly get involved. Interactions are often unpleasant. You, at the back, stop doing that. Physical used to, come on, quickly, now, come on. Wash your hands, wash your hands. That's a very poor, inadequate basis for an interaction, yes? Okay, should we look at minimal? Minimal on Eckers. Staff usually are pleasant. You all right? Nice day? You good breakfast this morning? How are you? I'm pleasant. If you do enough Eckers, you can spot pleasant. Okay, and there's not many unhappy things going on. Should we look at good? Okay, let's look at, yes, good? Yep, good, okay. Staff show appropriate physical contact. Yeah. That's a good basis for an interaction. If I wanted to do an interaction with Marcella, and I might, is this a good basis for an interaction? Marcella, how's that for you? Okay, but this might not be the best way to have an interaction. No? Okay. But if I look at Marcella like this, what kind of interaction can we have now? Is that better for you? That's a better, yeah? So the Eckers shows us ways that we can actually help to encourage good interactions. And if you think most primary children come up to your crotch, that's not a good start to an interaction. Okay, should we look at excellent? Okay. This one seems very obvious. Staff enjoy being with children. They have a joy of working with young children. That's different to pleasant. And sometimes I go into preschools and I see the worker and I think she's just not having a bad day. She doesn't like children. And then you might want to suggest she thinks of a career in the supermarket. But staff enjoy being with children. They actually wait. Marcella, you're 3 years old. It takes you a long time to ask a question. But I wait. I give you the time to ask your question before I give you an answer. That's a good adult basis for a good adult-child interaction. So can you see how Eficaz gives you a minimal, an inadequate, a minimal, a good, and an excellent? Can you see how it works? What was interesting is, when we did the analysis, the scores on the Eficaz were not just about what a group of academics think might be good for children. There were actually statistical relationships between setting scores on the Eficaz and their outcomes, their measurable outcomes for children. So if your setting did very well on the Eficaz the Eficaz your children had better social interactions, they had better independence, better peer sociability. If your setting did better on the Eficaz your children at age 5 had better phonological awareness, better pre-reading skills, better independence. So there was relationships between the actual quality instruments and how well children performed later on. We also looked at the interaction between the caregiver and the child. And we looked at whether they had positive relationships, whether they were punitive, which means they were harsh or over-controlling, whether they were permissive, which meant they just avoided disciplining and the control of children, or whether they were detached and slightly cold. And what we found was that there were again statistically significant relationships between the behaviours of the adult working with the child and the measurable child outcomes. So if you were positive with your children, they had better pre-reading and early number. If you were punitive, permissive, or detached, they had much lower scores on their actual measurable outcomes. That was for their intellectual development. But the same was true for children's social behaviour. If you were positive with children, they had better independence and concentration, better cooperation and conformity, and better peer sociability. If you were punitive, your children were less cooperative. If you were permissive, your children had less independence and concentration and less cooperation and conformity. And if the preschool worker was detached, the children had worse cooperation and conformity, and they had poor peer sociability. So it's not just the Eficaz scales and the processes. There's a very great deal to do with children's outcomes and the behaviours of the adults who are in the room with them, day in, day out. This doesn't require resources. This is about understanding children and enjoy being with children. Okay, this is the last part. That was the bit on quality. Was that okay? Yeah. Can I just say a last little bit before we move on? About the EPPEs. There are lots of things the EPPEs don't capture. A lot of people say, oh, the EPPEs, it's all about resources. It's all about money. But actually, we saw a lot of very good practice in settings that didn't have massive resources, didn't have expensive things, but they used the things that they could get hold of really well, with an emphasis on being sympathetic to children's needs. So the EPPEs isn't all about resources. A lot of it is about what you do with what you've got. And so there's a lot about the processes. So that's important. The other thing is, well, is it the best we can do at the moment? Well, actually, it's probably not a bad place to start. If you get excellent on EPPEs, doesn't mean you've got nothing to improve. And when we use it in England now, what we found is that it's actually a very, very good tool to start a debate, to have a dialogue about quality. We might not agree, but we've got something in front of us we can argue about in terms of what our understanding of quality is. So it isn't everything, but it's not a bad place to start. Okay, the last part of my presentation is about pedagogy. What did we find that was important in terms of pedagogy? Well, in the EPPE study, we had lots of information from the EPPEs, but we also embedded some researchers into settings where we wanted to know what did they do day to day that really made a big difference to children's learning. And what's interesting is these 5 really important things have got very little to do with resources. But the 5 things we found that were crucial for really good outcomes for children was 1, the quality of the adult-child interaction. And that doesn't matter how many resources you've got. The second one was the knowledge and understanding of the curriculum. And it didn't really matter what curriculum, it was about the adult working with the child who understood how learning builds. The third thing was the knowledge of how young children learn. It was about knowing good old child development. Knowing what's developmentally appropriate for that child to move on to the next stage in their learning. The fourth thing was how good the adult was in supporting children to sort out conflicts. Did they just stop them, tell them to go away, stop being naughty? Or did they actually bring children together and get them to talk about the situations where conflict had arisen? And then the fifth thing, the last thing that was important, was how well the preschool setting worked with the parents to support the child's learning. So it wasn't just about giving the adult a reading book to take home to the child. It was about talking with that parent about what they do with a reading book when they get it home. And not all parents do know what to do with a book when they get it home. It was not just giving the parents puzzles to do with the children at home, but explaining to them how they can make playing with their child with a puzzle can be a really, really good learning, bonding, loving experience. And our very best settings were the ones who worked with the parents to help improve the home learning so that the ethos of the setting was understood by the parents. How did we know that was important? Well, we went back to our statistical data. We looked at the scores for children at aged 3, and we looked at the scores of children at aged 5. Controlling for all of the background factors that we had in the study, we could predict where certain settings would actually, where children would be when they left preschool. And we had a line here of predictability. So all of these settings in green, children came in with scores and went out with scores that we could predict. These settings did what we thought they'd do. We then had some settings in red where children underperformed. Our least effective settings. And we also had, here in orange, some settings where children, given their background characteristics, overperformed. These settings really gave children a big oomph to their cognitive and social behavioural settings. We called these our most effective settings, and it was in these settings that we embedded our researchers to find out what those settings did day to day that made a difference. And that was how we knew those 5 things were important. When we did our qualitative case studies, we looked at the centre profile, what kind of setting it was, size, number of children. We looked at the qualifications of the staff and their experience. We looked at the management and leadership. We looked at the classroom organisation. We looked at parental involvement. We looked at the ethos of the setting. We looked at their curriculum, the types of pedagogy they demonstrated, and their community outreach, working with the community. And I have about 5 minutes left, so in the 5 minutes I have left, I just want to talk about 3 things that were particularly important in those really, really good settings. The first was something we called sustained shared thinking. So if I'm working with Marcelo, we have a dialogue. He's 3, but I engage him in an extended conversation. I challenge his thinking. I get him to question. We work together to discuss. I'm helping Marcella think. And it's that sustained shared thinking that some of our very best settings were good at. In fact, there was double the amount of sustained shared thinking in our best settings compared to just good settings. So there's something about that adult-child interaction. Adults really challenging children's thinking that's really giving these children cognitive progress, challenges. And maybe it goes back to something, again, Sharon Lynn said this morning, about that brain development of very young children, providing those kinds of stimulation. But that wasn't all. Something else our very, very good settings were good at was putting children together to work. Not just about the adult and the child every time, but putting children together to interact. And our very best settings had more one-to-one with children, not because there were more adults, but they structured their activities to enable the adults to spend their time talking to children. They were also better at putting groups of children together for particular purposes. So I know what you need, and I know what you need, and I put you two together deliberately because I think you need to work together. So it's not just about me and you, it's about you as a group. And our very good settings were very good at that. The other thing our very good settings did, they had a very, very good balance between children's free play and adults' activities. So they had a good balance between children just playing whenever they wanted to with anything they wanted, or adults putting out the activities that they do. And in our best settings, we had the child-initiated play, but a good balance between the child initiating some play and then the adult extending that play into a more solid learning experience, as opposed to just always being children playing by themselves on their own or adults just putting out all of the activities. So it had to be a good balance. Okay, the EPPE study has been going on for 13 years. We have funding till 2013, when our oldest children will be in their 20s. I hope I've told you a little bit about our study, a little bit about how research can actually make a difference to policy, and how policy can make a difference to a nation. I hope I've told you a little bit about the important impact of good quality preschool for children's long-term learning. And I hope I've told you a little about quality. I can't tell you all about the study, but we do have a website. We have lots and lots and lots of publications. And if you email me in English, I will reply. Thank you very much. You've been a lovely audience. Thank you.